True cases.
Division of Public Police engages in a pattern and practice of using excessive force.
Real victims.
No, he's not all right. They were pounding him in the head.
Examined by two experienced investigators.
Police cars shouldn't say to protect and serve, or they should be adding themselves on the bottom. It should say to protect and serve ourselves.
The missed clues.
Austin School Police acknowledging today that they should have done more to investigate.
The cover-ups.
It was a cover-up, and I think that people were looking out for their own skin.
From the extensive work by Salvatore Restrelli and Ira Robbins comes the Archangels of Justice case files. I am your host, Joe Rost, and I will be your guide on this quest to find the answers and give a voice to the victims of these tragic cases. Hello to our listeners, and thank you for joining us wherever you are for the Archangels of Justice case files. This is the 6th episode in a multi-part series looking into the Sheena Morris case. We are coming to the home stretch of the Sheena Morris case, with only 2 more episodes after this. So I can now officially say this is the 6th episode in an 8-part series. We apologize for releasing this a day later than usual, but we had a very good reason for it. Today, August 1st, would have been Sheena's 31st birthday. So in honor of that, we have done our very first supersized episode. It is going to be just under 2 hours, so you can listen to this much more like an audiobook and take breaks. If you listen to the first hour, that is mostly the Joe Genoese interview, the second hour being about the FDLE studies. If you could do us a favor, and please, after listening to this podcast, share it with your friends on every major social media network with the hashtag justice, the number 4, Sheena, and let the FDLE and Bradenton Beach Police know that we will not stand for the injustice done to Sheena Morris and her family. In this episode, I'm going to play the actual interview Art Brown and the FDLE conducted with Genoese, and the interview Sal did with a witness at the New Year's Eve party, John Ferentinos. But I'm going to apologize in advance for the audio during both these interviews. The FDLE sent a tape of the interview, not a CD, and there's some kind of humming noise that makes it hard to hear what is said, and it is very annoying to listen to. And in the John Ferentinos interview, there was a TV playing in the background. Sal did the interview in 2014 and was not planning on having it in a podcast. But I did everything I could to clear up both of them. I will try to summarize when possible, but hearing Genoese give his recollection of the night will let the listener decide if he is being truthful. I am joined today by the same people from episode 5, which includes Kelly Osborne, Sheena's mother, Dave Morris, Sheena's father, Lee Williams from the Herald Tribune, and of course, our 2 Archangels, Sal and Ira. But first, a message from our sponsors. Do you want to launch your own podcast or host your own media? Then you should be looking at blueberry.com. That's BLUBRRY.com. With no third-party sites to log into, you remain in control by never leaving your website and having an iTunes and SoundCloud-friendly RSS feed. Get your 30-day free trial by just typing AoJ Podcast when you check out, and you could be broadcasting your very own media today. Did you know that approximately 95% of purchase decisions are made on the first pages of search engines? TotalFrontPage.com knows this, and they can do what no other digital marketing company does. Put your company name in the autocomplete box of Google and Bing, so that searchers see your business before they see any other company. Your business will appear in most, if not all, organic listings. No competitors, just you. If you'd like to know more about this groundbreaking service, you can check out their website, TotalFrontPage.com. Or for a free consultation, mention AoJ Podcast in the subject line when you email info@TotalFrontPage.com. Act today, because once these search terms are purchased, they cannot be used by any other company. Again, thank you to our sponsors for supporting this podcast. Please support them as they've supported us. So with that, I give you the second part of our review of the FDLE investigation in episode 6 in the Sheena Morris series. Last episode, I summarized the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which I'll be abbreviating to FDLE from now on, their recap of the events and the investigation surrounding the death of Sheena Morris. In this episode, I'll be picking up where we left off in that report. The FDLE breaks down the investigation techniques that were used to come to their conclusion. I would like the listener to take notice to not only the language that is used in this report, but the things the FDLE forgets to mention. The first thing FDLE agents Carl Shedlock and Chris Shimmers did is investigate room 525 to see if you were able to hear through the walls. They inspected the room with the help of the owner and reported that in 2009 the walls were thin enough to hear yelling in the neighboring rooms. The report then goes into extensive detail about the color of the tiles, the layout of the room, but makes no mention of the investigative techniques that could have been done by Detective Diaz, crime scene technician Jason Smith, or medical examiner Megan Shimrack. The FDLE investigators make note that they checked the shower pipe to make sure it could support Sheena's weight. Sal talks about a few of the problems with this room investigation the FDLE did.
That's not even a test. Her body was supported by that shower head or the shower piping. There's a picture of it. There's no doubt. But you got to remember, she was only part of her weight was being put on that shower head. Not all of her weight, because part of her weight was supported by her own legs, which were out and extended in front of her, and her back was against the shower wall. So it wasn't like it was supporting all 110 pounds of Sheena. And then the second part of that is, it's still not a hanging. No matter how they want to call it a hanging, it's not a hanging. She died from strangulation. She had petechia in her eyes, for one thing, and the fact that she was suspended in that way. She could have stood up. You know, when you're in, I've seen actual hangings where people have attempted to do an autoerotic thing and then they wind up dying as a result. And they film it. I don't know why they do this, but they film it to watch it later, I guess. But I've actually seen people die from being hung. And their first reaction is when they realize that they can't escape from what's happening, they try to get out of it. They try to stand up. They try to reach for the cord or whatever it is that they've used to suspend themselves. You don't have that in Sheena's case, where Sheena could have stood up. She could have pushed herself straight back up again, but they never processed that floor. And the fact that they said they processed the walls on either side of Sheena, and there's no swipe marks or any kind of hand marks on the wall, that tells me Sheena didn't lower herself to the floor either. And she was not alive when she was suspended in that shower. Not. She was dead already. And she would have reached up if she was, or stood up, but they never processed the floor. But they did process the wall. And they found no marks. This doesn't ring true because she couldn't have dropped herself like this detective from FDLE is saying, oh, it would have supported her weight. Had she hung herself and put that noose around her neck and tied it to the shower and just dropped all her body weight would have bent that shower head with that much force at one time. You follow me? Because now all of her weight is going to the floor. He didn't do that. He just kind of pulled down on it. I know I can bend a shower head just by sheer muscle force. You grab a hold of it hard enough, you'll bend it because it's copper pipe in the wall. It's not steel, it's copper.
Next, the FDLE report talks about the interviews and background checks they did on Joe Genoese and Sheena Morris. According to their report, they identified, located, and interviewed friends and family of both Sheena and Genoese. These people who were interviewed were identified by the FDLE agents as social contacts. The first person they talk about in their report is Joe Genoese. I have the taped interview with Art Brown, and I'll play that for you shortly. But because not everything in this report is talked about during the interview, I'm going to have to read some of the parts and then break up the interview to remind you what Genoese had said on other occasions. I would like the listener to please remember that this is the only taped interview or official statement that Joe Genoese has made to any Florida law enforcement agency, and it was done 4 years after Sheena's death.
It's going to be the investigation into the death of Sheena Morris. Today's date is October 3rd, time is 4:44 p.m. This is Art Brown, State Attorney's Office. Present with me are Agent Chris Seamers, Agent Carl Shedlock, and witness Joe Genoies. And Joe, I already swore you in, and we've been talking for about an hour, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Joe, you told me a lot about your relationship with Sheena. You said that start going out, and you're fuzzy on dates and times. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I am. I
Okay.
apologize for it.
That's fine. And I think your final best answer was that you start going out roughly 2006, 2007.
2007 would probably be accurate.
Okay. Because your recollection is you guys went out about 2 years.
Correct.
And you told me you broke up 2 or 3 times. One of those times, she was going out with a guy named Cliff Davis. And how long was she going out with Cliff Davis?
I think it was a short time, just about a month maybe.
Okay. And then another time she was going out with Sal Vaquero.
Correct.
I have a note here about Frank O'Connor. Would Frank O'Connor have been aware of Sheena's drinking or drug use?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you know if he would have been aware of her taking the oxy?
He may have, because he did live with her and Juddy. He was there a lot.
I'm going to stop right there and talk about this drug claim Genoese has started making. But first off, why did Art Brown not record the first hour of their conversation? What was said during that time? Second, I would like you to remember no drugs were found in Sheena's system, and her blood alcohol was below the legal limit. Why doesn't Art Brown follow up or press him about this? I had Kelly and Dave talk about this claim Genoese had started making, that Sheena was a drug addict and an alcoholic.
Absolutely not. And as a matter of fact, my husband and I used to joke that when she would come over and join us for a drink, that it would sit there on the counter for so long and she didn't consume it, that she would actually go over and pour it out and then make a fresh one and be like, well, it's just, it's just ice now, and so no. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that he says that because all her friends know her, that she absolutely despised drugs. She made it very clear to all of her friends. And as a matter of fact, all of her friends knew that when she would go out somewhere, she was never ever seen drunk.
Well, not to mention, you're talking October and November. I don't know how long prescription drugs would stay in your system for, but if they're doing blood work or tissue work on her to find out what's in her system, I don't know how long it would stay in there for, but obviously it was never found in her system. You're talking somebody on a 22-year-old girl on New Year's Eve that's got a bottle of vodka in her room, and there's a legal limit as far as alcohol in her system.
Picking back up with Art Brown's interview with Joe Genoese.
And we talked about her reaction to the death of her friend, Matt Kennedy, and said she was very depressed and she stayed. Is that when she stayed in bed for a couple of days?
That year, she was in bed for 2.5 days, 3 days, almost 3 days.
Right around the time frame of Christmas 2008?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you don't know how she found out about Matt Kennedy or who told her about him or how he died?
I don't.
So one of the narratives the FDLE and Genoese try to push is that Sheena was so overcome by emotion at the death of Matt Kennedy that she stayed in bed for 3 days. I talked to Kelly about who Matt Kennedy was and how Sheena reacted to his death.
Not long before Sheena passed, that this young man that Sheena knew when she was 12 years old and hadn't seen him since they were probably 12 or 14 years old, he had committed suicide. And I know her exact demeanor about it because when she called me to tell me about it, she had just left my house, her and Genoese did, and so she called me back, and I said, she just goes, Mom, it's Matt. Well, I knew exactly who I was talking about because I don't know any other Matt. And so then she told me, I said, all right, hold up, I'll be right there. And so I got in my car and I brought her back to the house and we got on the computer and we were looking at pictures of him on his MySpace. She was fine. She goes, okay, I'm good. I'm fine. Can you take me back home? I've got stuff to do. And I remember being mad because when I went to pick Sheena up, she got in the car and I said, where's Joe? She goes, he's sleeping. And I'm like, oh, nice. Okay. And so, I just left it at that. But like I said, we got done at the counter. I mean, the news is a little shocking at first. So anyway, I think my point is that she was not so distraught that this went on for days.
I'm going to skip over a few parts of the interview where Art Brown talks to Genoese about the wedding plans and pick up where they begin to talk about New Year's morning.
Any particular reason why you stayed in the front bedroom versus the basement?
My thought was that there was a bunch of people over. I didn't know who was upstairs, who was downstairs, and I thought that downstairs would be the best place to get away from everybody.
Okay, that night, the night that you had to buy the sheet.
Yeah, it seemed like there was a lot of people in the house. I just wanted to get downstairs and get away. And I didn't know who was sleeping over, who was, any of those things.
And we talked about when you were staying with Sheena, you indicated you had a key to her place, as best of your recollection, until the time of her death.
Yes.
Okay. And you don't remember at this point what became of it, whether you turned it in to somebody or gave it away, or whether it's even still on your keychain.
I don't remember.
I don't know if you caught that, but Genoese just said he had a key to Sheena's place. That is a lie. Sheena even stated that on the 911 call. But if you also remember back to episode 2, Genoese did have the keys to Sheena's place, but they were Sheena's, and he took them when he left her at the hotel. How could Art Brown be leading the interview of Genoese and not have at least heard about this, so Genoese could clear up the confusion? Getting back to the Art Brown interview of Genoese.
In the aftermath of Sheena's death, as far as you can recall, you never went to the apartment without Kelly Osborne or some other members of Sheena's family being present.
No.
Here's another opportunity for Art Brown to clear up some confusion. Kelly interviewed a neighbor that saw Genoese coming and going from Sheena's apartment in the days after her death. Genoese had her keys, so this is entirely possible, but Art Brown ignores it. I have Kelly talk more about this.
I do know that he was going over there. I had spoken to one of the neighbors who witnessed that he was going there and removing things from her apartment. And that was pretty upsetting to us. Well, when we went to her apartment, she had, coming up on January, everybody gets into that organization mode, and she had just purchased new file boxes to keep things all organized. And when we went to pack her belongings into her apartment, there's only just one small file box with just a very little bit in there. Her file for her AAA, a few vet records, but nothing compared to what a normal person has in their files. So there was a blank space in the closet where there was nothing, and file boxes were gone.
It's very interesting Art Brown makes no mention of this. But moving on with the Genoese interview.
And we talked about how you observed the words, "He's just a boy," written in lipstick on the mirror after Sheena. Or that was actually, you observed those before you guys had gone down to Bradenton Beach.
Yes.
Okay. And tell me what your conversation was with Sheena about that. Tell me again, what did you say to her and what did you say back about that?
It was Christmas Day. I was picking her up. I was getting her out of bed. I was forcing her to get out of bed to go over to Mother's for Christmas dinner.
Had you guys spent Christmas Eve together?
No.
Okay.
I was with my children.
You were with your children?
Yes.
At Marcos's?
Yes.
Okay.
What I understood was she told me she was in bed for 2 or 3 days. Didn't get out of bed, didn't eat, didn't shower.
Had you not, was Christmas Day the first time that you'd seen her in a couple of days, or had you been going over there periodically during that time?
That was the first time I saw her in probably 2 days.
Okay, so Genoese says a few things here that don't fit with the timeline of events. If you think back to the first episode, Genoese and Sheena went to New York City on December 19th for his birthday, which Sheena planned. They got back on the 22nd, and Sheena went shopping with her mother on the 23rd. Remember, this was when they talked about the engagement ring being fake. Then Sheena saw her family on Christmas Day on the 25th. You can see that video on archangelsofjustice.org. So when exactly did Sheena stay in bed for 3 days? I have Kelly and Dave talk about Genoese saying this.
I was with her on December 23rd, where they had another argument. I think we discussed that in episode 3, that she had come over to the house and they were in an argument. So her and I went Christmas shopping together and enjoyed the day and had a great time.
Think about the timeline. I believe they leave on December 18th to go to New York City for his birthday, which is the 19th, and they stay there for 2 or 3 days. And now Kelly's with her on the 23rd. I mean, they were in New York City for 2 or 3 days, and now Kelly is with her on the 3rd. I mean, the days just don't add up. That in bed for Christmas for 3 days.
Instead of questioning Genoese about these time inconsistencies, Art Brown is more concerned about what Sheena wrote in red lipstick on her mirror.
So you go over there, you see this lipstick, and tell me what the conversation is between you and Sheena about
I went there to get her, and she was still in bed, And I was like, come on, Sheena, get out of bed, etc. And I was starting to persuade her, and then I had to go to bed. And when I opened it, just on the mirror, there was all these pictures taped up and all this stuff and lipstick written. And I was like, Sheena, what's this? And she just shrugged her shoulders.
Did she say anything about it? Give you any information like who she'd been writing about or what had caused her to do it? Anything?
She just shrugged her shoulders, and I took it as she was home for 2 days, and she was upset. And this is something she was doing, Not,
you didn't ask her anything more about it?
No, I didn't. No.
Is it 2 or 3 days? If she was so depressed, how was she able to plan your birthday in New York City? These are some of the questions Art Brown could have followed up with, but he doesn't. I have Kelly and Dave talk about the red lipstick and this picture board Sheena had been putting together.
I don't remember the lipstick part, but I can tell you that what I do know for a fact is at the time, my husband and I were listening to this series of CDs called The Secret. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's basically the part that we had gotten to, and we were going to be doing it with Sheena, is we had gotten these boards, and you're going to do like this vision board of the things that, how do I want to explain, the things that you were working towards in your life, or things that you wanted, or things that you would picture. And so even at the time then, I put stuff on my mirrors even at my home, which was still there that day, which was a card with a letter that my husband had written to me. So anyway, we were in the process of building these boards that we were going to do our positive affirmations with. And that's what I think that she was doing, because they weren't depressing. They were positive. We saw the Post-it notes and pictures of her friends and our good times with these little sayings that she had on there. But I don't recall seeing anything in lipstick, but it wouldn't alarm me if I did, because Sheena and I used to write on lipstick. I mean, it sounds maybe rather little girlish, but
well, I remember a picture that was on that mirror that Lisa and I had both looked at, and it was a picture of Sheena and Juddy, and they were both wearing some kind of crazy cowboy hats or something. They were out somewhere, and underneath it said "A Night on the Town."
Uh-huh.
I remember seeing that.
I mean, hey, if that's the way, I guess if that's the way she's feeling, he's just a boy, then she's basically just saying, I don't care. I mean, how many times, I didn't see it, but how many times, they break up and she's not devastated. She's not hurt. She's carrying on with her life. She starts dating other people. He's the one that has her followed by his private investigator. He's the one that stalks her during breakups and taunts her.
Next, Art Brown finally asked Genoese about the events leading up to New Year's Eve. I skipped a few parts here where they talk about shopping and things like that because it's irrelevant to the case.
Between Christmas Day and the 30th, when you came down to Bradenton Beach, did you guys spend most of that time together, or just a portion of it, or what?
We were together the whole time.
Okay. So the night of New Year's Eve, you guys ate at the beach house, kind of late, you said, more like in the time frame of 7:30, 8:30, something like that?
Yeah, it was probably 8 o'clock, 8:30, somewhere around there.
And some point, you went back to the room to get the dogs to take them out and walk them fairly close in time to midnight.
Yes.
And the dogs got sand spurs all over them, and so you guys had to get the dogs back to the apartment, or back to the hotel.
Yes.
And from that point on, you guys did not go back out to the beach or anything.
No.
You said you watched the fireworks from the front of the front balcony.
Yes.
In front of the front door to the room.
And you did say you had laid on the beach that day, New Year's Eve.
Yes.
A couple hours?
Yes.
And Sheena had been reading what book?
Marlene.
All right. And did she finish the book while you guys were out on the beach?
She did.
And is she telling you about it while she's reading it? Is she saying like, oh, this is so sad, or this is about a dog, or is she saying anything to you about it?
No, just the end of the book. I mean, I looked over at one point, not the end of the book, but somewhere towards the end, I believe it was. I looked over and she was crying.
Okay. You say, hey, why are you crying? What's the
No,
matter?
I got the understanding that I just understood in my mind saying the reason she was crying was because the dog died. I knew it somehow.
Had you already read the book yourself?
No.
Did you know what the book was about or what?
No. But I think she was telling me he was sick and, you know.
So she was telling you some stuff about what was going on.
Right, yeah. Prior to she was, yeah. But at that moment when I looked over, she was crying. I figured she was telling me the dog was sick prior to that, in the interim of reading a book. And I figured the dog died.
I have to stop the interview again. What is this? Why isn't Art Brown allowing Genoese to explain the events as he remembers them that night, and comparing those statements with the ones Detective Diaz wrote down during the multiple interviews Detective Diaz claims he had with Joe Genoese? With that in mind, listen as the interview continues.
So getting back to that night, you watch the fireworks from the balcony, and then is it right after that that you call your children?
Yes, around 10 or quarter after 12, midnight.
And you describe that you're walking from the front of the apartment or the room back towards the back slider and the balcony back there. And tell me what happens as you finish your phone call with your children.
I turned around, Sheena walked up to me, looked at me and said, who did you call? I said, my son Joey, to wish him a happy new year. And she said, you just fucked our whole night.
How close was she to you when she sang it?
A foot away.
Okay.
So this is something Genoese started mentioning in the years after Sheena's death, that she did not like his kids. I asked Kelly and Dave, had they ever heard Sheena complain about having to deal with Genoese's children?
There was a lot of things that she'd try to do for his kids. To Genoese, it always never seemed to be good enough. He would feel. But I know that Genoese had left his children when he was supposed to have them for the weekend, and Sheena went over to the house to be with them and monitor them like they were supposed to be. Instead of him doing it, she did it. So obviously there was some care there, and there's plenty of photographs where she's doing things with his kids. If you were to even talk to Brenda Claudio, he, with his children, were just, in general, very difficult. The argument that Genoese and Sheena had on the 23rd, she was just aggravated with him because he had stayed at her apartment with her, and the phone rings early in the morning, and he's talking with his children while laying in bed, and he's talking baby talk to them. And so, yeah, this annoyed her. She said, you know what? You're sitting here talking, and I'm trying to sleep. And which I would probably do the same thing myself. I'd be pretty irritated. And then she said it gets worse from there, because then he gets up and goes into the bathroom, and so now it's echoing, and she was just really annoyed. Like, have some respect, have some courtesy for others,
He, from what I understand and from what I remember, he would get out of more weekends that he was supposed to have his children than weekends that he actually had them.
Art Brown continues with his interview of Joe Genoese.
What did you guys do at that point?
She just looked at me and said, you know what, I just want to go to bed.
She said that, or you said it?
She said that.
Okay. So you guys get in bed, and you actually turn the lights out?
Yes.
Okay. And turn out the lights, and I think you said you were almost asleep, and then what happened?
She got up, took the covers off, went over to the light switch, flicked the light on, and said, oh no, you're not going to sleep. Okay. You're not going to sleep. I'm tired of these
And then she went into a rage of, I'm tired of these effing kids ruining our lives. We'll never get out of our lives. She went over and punched the wall. And then I got up out of bed and I was like, Sheena, what are you doing? And
you said she's screaming at this point.
Yeah, screaming from the time she flipped the light on. Punching. She went over, punched the wall, and she got up in my face, and I was like, well, Sheena, calm down. She started, got right up in my face, started spitting on me, and then she, after she got through her yelling, she basically told me, I want to leave. Let's pack. Let's get out. I want to leave.
So it was her idea to pack up and leave?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So, and you indicate that both of you actually start packing?
Yes. Yeah, I agree to that. I said, yeah, let's get out of here.
Where had your clothes been before you started packing? Had you guys put them in like the dresser drawers, or where were they?
They were in drawers and such.
So here's another instance where Art Brown can press Genoese on the facts of this case. Sheena's things weren't found packed up in her suitcase. They were still in the drawers. So that means she unpacked after Genoese left? That doesn't really make much sense. But Art Brown continues with his interview of Genoese.
So you're packing up, and then what happens?
We're packing up. I have everything in my suitcase. She seems to have everything in her suitcase. I go over to get the rest of the stuff off the nightstand, meaning my watch and whatever, change, money. I start putting that in my pocket. I start putting my watch on, and then she grabbed the money off of the bureau.
And you told me it was kind of a thick wad of money folded in half.
Yeah, I'd say probably maybe $600-800.
Now let me ask you, when you guys are fighting, is there any indication the neighbors are bothered by this? Does anybody pound on the door, say, hey, shut up in there, or anything like that?
No, I never heard any. I don't think I ever heard any.
Okay.
I don't believe anybody. So, no.
So she grabs your money, and then what do you do?
She starts kind of heading towards the door, and I grabbed her shirt. And I got the money out of her hand and put it in my pocket. And then she went over to the door and blocked the door and said I wasn't going anywhere. And
was there any time during this where you might have inadvertently scratched her or anything like that?
No. The scratch came from her necklace. She had a small little scratch on her neck, and it's because when I grabbed the shirt, her necklace came with the shirt. That's all. And
now, one thing we had talked about before is there was an indication in the Bradenton Beach Police Department reports and also reports from FDLE that you had recalled to them in earlier interviews that Sheena had said something like she wanted to go back out. And your recollection today, though, is that did not happen. That wasn't part of the argument.
I don't know. I don't remember that conversation.
Okay.
The thing was, she said I wasn't going anywhere. I mean, and I told you specifically when that happened.
But you feel pretty certain she didn't say, I want to go back out and, have a drink or something like that. You feel pretty certain that did not happen.
I don't know. If it was the night before that we talked about going back out and I didn't feel like going out, I don't remember. I don't remember in specific that night that conversation. I think the night before that conversation might have happened on the 30th. Because we came back and I think she wanted to go back out. But I can't even tell you for certain that. I don't remember that conversation.
Now,
I'm sorry.
Are you certain that the money that you took back from her, you took from her hand as opposed to her purse?
Absolutely, from her hand. She grabbed it off the bureau, started going towards the door. I grabbed her shirt so she couldn't leave. Because then if she would have left with my money, we couldn't have left or I couldn't have left.
So Genoese admits to physically assaulting Sheena, but Art Brown doesn't follow up with any questions. Where exactly was Sheena going to go with the money? Genoese was the one who drove, and Sheena didn't have his keys. Genoese was the one who had Sheena's keys. Art Brown's interview continues.
Did she yell anything like that might have been heard by the neighbors to the effect of, hey, don't take any money out of my purse?
No.
Did she ever yell anything about you not taking $100 that her father had given her? Did she say anything about that?
Yeah, I think I remember some kind of conversation in the money that there was money with my money that was her money.
Okay. And so had she told you about that before, that her father had given her $100 and it was supposed to be kind of symbolic that if she held on to it long enough that he would give her some more money? Remember anything about that?
I don't know.
It might have had some significance for her.
Yeah, I do remember something like that, yeah. Okay. The $100, and if she was able not to spend it he would give her some more money. I remember something like that. But I don't remember being in the money, in the money that I had.
But was she saying that it was when you're taking back your money? Was she saying, "Hey, you got my $100 that my dad gave me"?
No, I don't remember that.
No. Okay.
I mean, this was very quick. It was.
I understand.
Yeah.
Was this the only argument you would have had during the time you were at the bridge walk about money?
Yeah, because there was really no argument prior to.
Wait, did Genoese just say there was no argument prior to? Didn't he just say they had an argument about his kids? How is this inconsistency not picked up by Art Brown?
Now, I want to make sure
I don't even remember when that conversation was. That $100 thing, that might have been right after Christmas or something. I mean, I don't remember that certain specific hour.
But you did recall that she was saying something to you about, "Hey, you got some of my money," after you took it back from her.
I think she was saying some of her money was in with that money.
Okay. All right. The part that you don't remember is her mentioning that you had like $100 that her dad gave you.
No, I mean, it wasn't that long of a conversation.
And then after that, you indicated that she kind of blocks the door with her arms, and you actually demonstrated to me holding her arms out to the sides and blocking the pathway through the door.
Yes.
Okay. And then you said you're having kind of a conversation with her like, "Hey, we're either, are you going? Are you coming or not?" And what happens? Tell me about that. You're trying to get her to come with you, and what happened?
I told her we're packed. We're leaving. You decided to leave. We're leaving. I'm going, Sheena. Either you come or you stay, but I'm leaving. So let's go. And I was trying to persuade her to go. Let's go, because we had packed and I wanted to leave. She wanted to leave. I wanted to leave. And now all of a sudden she decided that she didn't want me to leave. And I was done. I wanted to leave. I was done with this whole scenario. And then she said, I'm not going anywhere. When I repeatedly asked her to leave, let's go, Sheena, let's go, and then she said, I'm not going anywhere with you. And that's when she stepped aside and let me go out the building.
Okay. And then you said you got in your car, you saw a police vehicle there in the parking lot, and you would have gone out for a test.
Yeah, I went out the front. I went down the steps, right out where the balcony is, down the steps, and put my luggage in my car and backed up, headed out, took a right out of the parking lot, and I think I took the first causeway over, which I think you believe is Cortez.
And you said very soon after you had left, she starts calling and texting you.
Yes.
And what's your recollection of the phone calls? What she says to you? And first, let me ask you: are you able to distinguish between what she texted you and what she was saying to you on the phone? Remember, have a clear memory of? Can you separate them out?
To the best of my recollection, the first text I got was, "How can you leave me here?" That was the first set of texts. And then I responded, "I didn't leave you there, you chose to stay." And then I think I got a phone call, and she's like, "You left me here, how could you leave me here?" And I was like, "Sheena, I'm done." I explained, "Get one of your friends to pick you up. I'm done, I'm out of here." And then there was another phone call, and I believe at that phone call, I explained to her that I wanted to go to the house. Or maybe the first phone call was, "How did you leave me here?" Blah, blah, blah. And I explained to her that I wanted to go to the house and get my clothes. She said, "You're not going to my house." And then she hung up on me. Then I got a call probably 10 minutes later telling me if I went to her house that she had called Tampa police. That's why she hung up, because she called Tampa police. And now the phone call is probably a half hour after I left. Okay. Because I remember I was already, I think, on 75 and planning in my head to go to get my clothes. And she called me back and said that she had called Tampa police, and that if I went to her house, that they would be waiting for me there, and I would be arrested for trespassing or violating your home or whatever. And at that point, I told her, "You know what, Sheena, forget it. I'm just going home." And I think I hung up on her.
And was it during one of the phone calls where she claimed that you had scratched her?
Yeah, she told me that she has pictures. She told me that that she scratched, that I scratched her. That she has pictures. And all of a sudden, I'm saying to myself, now she's going to play this domestic violence card.
Has she ever done that to you before? Has she ever threatened to call the police? And
she did that. Yeah, she would do that. Yeah,
Had she actually done it? Had she actually called the police on you before?
No, there was never any reason for her to call police. We never got into a situation of any type of domestic violence. We had arguments. I mean, even this wasn't a domestic violence issue. It was just her, me telling her I was going to get my clothes. That's why she called the police.
Are you saying, though, that in the past she had threatened to call the police on you? Has that ever happened before?
Well, she would threaten to call police, or, I mean, no, I don't even think there was ever a conversation to call police. We had gotten into arguments before, and but I don't think there was ever, we never got into a physical altercation where she would have to call police. Okay. So I don't think there was ever a conversation about police. Police was never involved in our relationship.
So I'm going to stop the interview again here because there are a few things that don't make sense. Genoese can recall exact details of where he was when Sheena called, but can't remember whether he paid a toll or not. Also, Genoese says there was nothing physical in their relationship in the past, but if you remember back to the Dr. Phil show, Kelly Holland, Sheena's best friend, told a story of when Genoese chased one of Sheena's ex-boyfriends, Sal Vaccaro, with a gun. Art Brown could have pressed him on this, but he didn't even mention it. Also, Kelly and Dave told me a story about Genoese sending black roses to Kelly's house for Sheena.
So Sheena is dating this young man named Sal Vaccaro. He was on the Dr. Phil show as well. Sal and Sheena are over at our house, and we're having a pool day. I get a knock on the front door, and it's a delivery of flowers. And I accept them, and I look at them, and I'm like, well, I don't want to start a problem between her and Sal. So I take them into my room, and then I call her into my room. And she just starts shaking and crying, and she's very upset because the roses were black roses. And I said, what does this mean? What does black roses mean? And she said, it means death, Mom. It means death. And she cried, and she was very upset.
Obviously, he was stalking her. They were delivered to Kelly's house, not to Sheena's apartment. So he knew
but
Sheena
they were
was
to
there.
Sheena. Yep.
They were to Sheena, but sent to Kelly's house that Sheena was there.
We didn't have a violent relationship.
Let me ask you this. Did you ever keep any kind of business records or files at Sheena's place?
Did I keep business what?
Any business records or files at Sheena's apartment?
No, not really, because all my files were at the office, and I had office managers.
If you remember back to episode 2, when Kelly and Dave finally got into Sheena's apartment, they noticed there was a box missing in Sheena's closet where she kept her files. For the next few minutes, they talk about when Sheena worked for Genoese. Art Brown then jumps back to talking to Genoese about New Year's morning.
You indicated to me that you got to Marcus is roughly 2:30, 3 a.m.
Yes.
And you walked in the front door, and did you say you pretty much saw Marcos immediately after you walked in?
Yeah, he actually, I think, almost opened the door for me.
And then you went downstairs to the converted garage, which is now kind of a bedroom.
Yes. It's carpeted.
Okay. You think, or you have a vague recollection of maybe seeing Brenda in the kitchen, but you're not sure if she saw you.
Out of the corner of my eye, I think she was in the kitchen. Yeah. And then I heard other people in the family, but I didn't make any eye contact or talk to anyone else. Again, I was tired. I just wanted to go to bed.
Would you say you went to bed within like 15 minutes of getting there?
Yeah, I laid on the couch, turned the bed TV on, and I think I fell asleep probably a half hour. You know, I was tired. I was disgusted, and I was tired.
Did you turn out all the lights to that area that day?
Yeah, and it was a pretty big area. So I think the front, by the steps, and the couch was to the back. It was a very long. It's probably about 50 foot long down there. So, and the area I was in, I shut the lights out obviously, and I had the TV on.
So this has been Genoese's alibi for New Year's morning. He went to bed shortly after returning to his townhome that he rented to Marco Claudio and his wife. Genoese has made this very clear throughout the entire investigation. But when the Archangels of Justice got involved, Sal interviewed someone who attended the party, John Ferentinos, and here's what he saw that night.
So how would you say he was the first time when he first got in the night, after midnight? Kind of like he was Happy New Year, happy-go-lucky, like nothing was wrong, nothing bothered him. He was happy, excited, you know, celebrated, smiled, gave everybody hugs, you know, putting on normal Joe actions.
Okay. And then when he said he was going to go to the casino, was there anyone else around, or was it just the two of you?
I went outside to have a cigarette. I don't remember exactly if anybody was there with us. I'm pretty sure because my girlfriend at the time didn't smoke. And if anybody else was there, I don't remember. I just remember actually speaking to him.
All right, so you're at this party, and I guess it's going on to midnight, so you guys are doing what you typically do at parties.
Drinking
a little bit. Awesome. Okay. At midnight, it's New Year's.
Yeah, we all wished each other Happy New Year's. We went on top of the balcony, watched the fireworks. The way the balcony sat is if you look through one balcony, you got the fireworks over one area of the bay, and the other one was over the ocean. So we had fireworks from both areas. It was just beautiful the way it was set up. And once we got done, we were hanging out still. We were still partying, drinking, having a good time. And around about, I would say about an hour later, maybe anywhere between 12:15 to 1 o'clock, Joe came back home. I haven't seen him yet, so I wished him a Happy New Year. He said he was going to go downstairs, and then that's when I believe Marcos and Brenda said, hey, nobody go downstairs because Joe's going to sleep. He wanted to go to sleep. And I said, all right. And then I said, I went down there real quick because I was smoking a cigarette down by the pool. And he was outside talking to me, and he was actually sitting on the couch, and he came out and started talking to me. He's like, you know what, I think I'm going to go to the casino. So I turned around and I said, all right, well, have fun. I said, I thought you were tired. He goes, I am, but I just don't feel like sitting home right now. I just want to get out. I said, okay, cool. Well, that night, he goes, but I don't know yet for sure. We'll see. So I went up.
And now, about what time do you think this might be? I mean,
It was probably about 15 minutes after I got home.
So this could have been...
It's still between 12:15 and 1:15 now. Because it was about 12:30 to 1:15.
Couldn't have been later.
It could have. I'm not sure. All I know is when I went upstairs after my cigarette, well, we didn't go back downstairs. I asked my girlfriend at the time, which later on became my wife, Cynthia, to go downstairs and get my bags in her bag so we don't bother Joe going down there in the morning.
Okay.
And she went down there and she goes, I thought you told me to be quiet because I told her to be quiet because I don't want to wake him up. And she says, Joe's not down there. I said, well, maybe he's in the bathroom. Well, about an hour later, I was looking for my toothbrush, and she says, oh, I forgot that bag downstairs. So I went downstairs. That was about 4:30, maybe, about 4:30, 5 o'clock. I went downstairs, and I got my bag, and he still wasn't there.
Okay, so you went back down.
Yes.
So she went down before she didn't see him.
Correct. And then I went down around 4:30, and I didn't see him.
So 2 people at the party went downstairs and did not see Genoese that morning. The FDLE did interview Mr. Ferentinos, and I will talk about the circumstances surrounding his interview later. But this is a bombshell that seriously challenges the alibi Genoese has given law enforcement. Next, Art Brown talks to Genoese about what happened when he woke up.
Later on, you found out that somebody named Tony Liberata, had claimed to have seen you down there.
Yeah, he came down not knowing that I was down there, maybe, I don't know, right? And he had made mention that he saw me. And then again saw me when he got up to go fishing. All of them went up to go fishing and saw me again. I guess maybe he went downstairs to get a fishing rod. They had the rods down there. I don't know. He went out the back door to the downstairs. They may have had their rods down there. I don't know. But he said he saw me again around 7:30.
And you indicated you thought, your recollection is you would have woken up at roughly around 9:30, and you tried to text or call Sheena after that?
Yes.
When Sal interviewed Mr. Ferentinos, he remembers things a little different.
I woke up about 8. I don't know why it was so early. Something about sun hitting me in the face. I can't go to sleep. I can't stay asleep. And I went downstairs. I went down the front stairs. I walked outside to go to the store. And Joe's car wasn't there. He had a Mercedes at the time. Then I went to the store. I got a pack of cigarettes. This has got to be around 8:30. I went for a walk on the beach, had a cigarette. I was just sitting there looking, and I remember walking on the beach because I seen all the trash from the people lighting fireworks, and I was talking about how disgusting people can actually be.
Oh, they left all their stuff on
all the fireworks crap on there, and it was such a beautiful beach to ruin it like that. I remember looking at that. And then I decided I was going to go back to the house. It was probably about 9-ish, and he was making lox and bagels. He was home now.
So he returned around 9-ish.
Yeah, well, he was anywhere between the time I left and 9. He was making lox and bagels. He was toasting the bagels. He made some eggs for some people. I had the lox and bagels and the eggs. And I would say it was about anywhere between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, he got a phone call, and he left. And I didn't see him from that point on because I left around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I think. Okay.
Next, Art Brown talks to Genoese about why he called Sheena that morning. Remember, he just told Art Brown that he was done with the relationship. This was how Genoese responded.
Now, what was your thought process at that point? Because, I mean, the night before you're saying you told her we're through, right?
Yes.
Okay, were you thinking, had you thought it over, like the next morning, you're thinking, I really don't want to be done with Sheena, maybe we can patch it up? Is that what you were thinking?
I'm thinking to myself, why does she do the things she does? Why would she get upset with me calling my children? I mean, I just was asking the questions. Why are you like this? Why do you do things like this? You know, and, I was always trying to make things right with her and the kids and me. You know.
So
and,
did you? I mean, yeah. The night before you said we're done, right? Yeah. But now you're thinking, okay, you know, maybe we should see if we can work it out.
I'm asking her why she was doing things like that. Yeah, you know, yeah. I was like, I guess I had been like, you know, I don't know, yeah.
So are you leaving messages to that effect on voicemail or what?
I'm texting her, asking her why. You know, why do you get upset? Why do you do things like this? Look at that. You know?
There is absolutely no record of Genoese texting Sheena about why she can't get along with his children. The only message sent to Sheena at that time was from Genoese saying, "You need to get out of the room. I'm not paying for another night." Surely Art Brown and the 2 FDLE agents have the text message records from that day. How does no one in that room confront Genoese about this blatant lie? Art Brown and Genoese continued talking about what happened when he couldn't reach Sheena.
And at some point when you didn't hear from her, you called Kelly.
I texted her, I called her, didn't get any answer. I think I even left Sheena a message, maybe, I don't know. I called Kelly to tell her exactly what had happened.
How long after you started calling and or texting Sheena did you start did you try to contact Kelly? Like an hour?
No, it was probably shortly after. I mean, because I couldn't get a hold of her. And then I called Kelly to let her know what had happened. You know? Because, I mean, it was like we were working together, and me, Kelly, and her dad, and me mostly and Kelly, were trying to work with Sheena to make her a better person, I guess you could say, grown up, you know, etc. I mean, it was like, you know, and we had me and her had the best interest in mind for Sheena. And, you know, we would communicate on that level, you know. And that's why I called her. And I know she was arguing with her. And she was depressed. And so I called her mom. I was like, you know, to let her know what had happened the night before. You know, I was like, you know, we got into this fight. And just wanted her to let her know that what had transpired the night before.
If you remember back to episode 1, Kelly recalled a different set of events. Genoese's initial call to Kelly was unanswered, and he left a message, telling her that he did not send the text messages about staying out of their lives, and that Sheena took his phone and sent those. Genoese did not call Kelly until 3 hours later. That was when he told Kelly that Sheena was suicidal. This was the first time they'd ever discussed this. Kelly was at first shocked that Genoese had just left her at the hotel, but was more concerned with her daughter's safety. Kelly did not know that Sheena had already passed away, but because of her conversation with Genoese, she called the local hospital to ask them what you do if someone is suicidal. This was when she was told, you Baker Act them. But after the hospital heard the circumstances, they told Kelly that she did not have someone who was suicidal. The FDLE agents and Art Brown should know this, and at least ask Genoese about it. But again, they squander an opportunity to get Genoese to nail down his story. Art Brown then talks to Genoese about his relationship with Sheena, and if she had ever sent him anything indicating she was depressed or suicidal.
Let me ask you, Joe, when you were during the time you went out with Sheena, did she ever send you like any letters, cards, anything like that?
We would write on the computer sometimes. We
Email?
wrote each other letters on the computer.
Okay.
Via email.
Did you ever print out those or retain any of those?
I may have them still on my computer, but I'm not very computer literate either. And you got to understand, that many years ago, I really was a computer illiterate, and she was much better at it.
You still have the same computer?
I do.
Okay. Do you know if in any of those messages she would have sent you, if she ever talked about her depression or a problem she's having, anything like that?
No.
You're saying she never did?
No, she did not. No. The letter, it might have been one letter that we wrote back to each other via email, and it was basically maybe saying that we cared about each other, you know. And through our, you know, it was one of our times that we weren't together. You know.
Roughly, when would you say would have been the last time she would have communicated with you via email on the computer in relation to her death? Would it have been like shortly before Christmas or a long time before what?
Oh, a very long time before. We didn't communicate via email or anything. That's not how we communicate.
When you say you write letters on the computer, that means email to me.
Once. Yeah, right. Like, if I'm not mistaken, it was like an email.
Okay.
I mean, and at that time, I probably just established email. Okay. You know what I mean? So it was all muted.
I'm just wondering, would there be anything on your computer that might give us some idea of Sheena's mindset in the days prior to her death?
No. No. Okay. Facebook, she said she set up a Facebook account for me because I didn't know how.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You know, and I didn't even go on it because I didn't even know how to work it. So, but she was very Facebook savvy.
She never actually sent you any like written cards or anything like that, or love letters or anything like that.
I had cards, but never to the reference any depression or anything. They were always nice, something nice. And I gave all those to her mom.
You know, she never kept a diary, anything like that.
I found a diary. I found a log, but there was very little in it. You know, and the things I found in there didn't make me very happy. And this was afterwards.
What happened? Was afterwards. What happened to that? Did Kelly get that, or what?
Yeah, she got everything. She got upset when I even looked at it. So.
Did during the couple of days in and around Christmas when you were with your kids, did you and Sheena communicate at all, like by phone or text, while you were with your kids at Marcos?
Yeah, it was probably very short phone calls. Just having, what are you doing? She wasn't happy I was there, and there was no real sense of even talking. So.
All right. Gentlemen, any questions? Okay. All right, we're going to conclude the interview. The time is 5:23 p.m.
This is the end of Genoise's first and only recorded interview with any Florida law enforcement agency. If you'd like to hear the interview in its entirety, it will be available soon on the archangelsofjustice.org website. There are multiple things here in the interview that Art Brown and the FDLE never address or even ask Genoese about. Like the fact that he signed for 2 hotel keys and Sheena was only found with 1. Or that Genoese took Sheena's apartment keys when he left. The hotel guest next door stating that the fight was about money, not about kids or going back out. The hotel guest also heard Sheena say that Genoese put his hands on her neck. And that Genoese had stated on multiple occasions that he left Sheena with $100 to $150, but she was only found with 7. Sal talks about this flimsy interview Art Brown and the FDLE conducted.
You know, back to Genoese and Sheena, you know, during the interview Art Brown had with Joe, all they talk about is the possibility of Sheena's drug use. Sheena was not on any drugs, nor was she intoxicated when they found her body after the autopsy. Her blood work was performed. Now, you sit there and say to yourself, most suicides, about 90% of them, are done the person's either drugged up or drunk. She was neither. And the fact that she and he broke up that night over a little squabble, this Art Brown's trying to make it sound like it was such a devastating blow to her that she killed herself. But Joe Genoies, in the interviews with Art Brown, talked about several times that the two of them split up and that she would date other people before, after, and all this other stuff, and then they get back together. Not in any one of those incidences was Sheena suicidal. He even talks about, well, a couple days before they went out of town, Sheena was depressed and she was laying in bed for 2 or 3 days and she didn't want to see him. That's what he says. He never saw her laying in the bed. Maybe she didn't want to see him. Maybe she was out seeing somebody else.
The next people the FDLE report talks about are friends and coworkers of Sheena. The first was Rebecca Anaya, who was identified as one of Sheena's closest friends by Joe Genoese. If you remember back to previous episodes, Genoese was paying all of her attorney fees while she fought for custody of her child. Rebecca had also claimed that Sheena gave her a key to her apartment, but that key turned out to be fake. She was also seen on a date with Genoese 3 weeks after Sheena's death. This is what Rebecca told agents. First, they'd only known each other a year and a half, but they had grown very close in that time. Also, that she knew Joe Genoese as a friend and socialized with them as a couple. Rebecca advised that Sheena told her she was suffering from depression. She also told agents that she helped Sheena with periods of that depression. Rebecca then goes on to tell agents it was clear to her that Sheena was going to that, quote, dark place. I have Kelly and Dave talk about Rebecca and how close she was with Sheena.
I spent more time with Sheena than Rebecca ever did. So I don't know why and what her motive is for painting this picture, but she certainly did a damn good job with her theory. And if anyone's in a dark place, that would be Rebecca, because she is a very evil person. You figure anyone who is willing to be that brazen to a grieving mother, and even for her to talk to me the way she did, this is a girl that has no respect for anyone other than herself. Rebecca was in the picture for such a short time. Here Sheena spent so much time at our home. Um, I remember a few occasions, and it was a time when when she actually came to the house with Sheena when Sheena wrote the check. Another time was when Sheena asked me to drop what I was doing at work, that she had spring fever, and to meet her at Bahama Breeze, one of her favorite restaurants. So I told her I couldn't. I was busy working. And Sheena laughed and she said, "Don't make me call your husband and tell him that you won't meet me for lunch because he's busy in a meeting." And I will do that. And I'm like, "All right, okay, I'm fine. I'll come to lunch then." And I go to lunch and Rebecca's there. And Rebecca kept ordering more food, more drinks, more food, more drinks, and she wasn't paying for it. She was taking full advantage of Sheena. So I think Rebecca had gone to the restroom or something. And I said, "Sheena, I'm going Dutch here. I am not picking up her tab. It's just not happening." But I heard, from numerous people that this was Rebecca's MO. She'd ask people to go to lunch, and there she had other people pay her way all the time.
Next, Rebecca states in the FDLE report that in December 2008, Sheena began giving Rebecca some of her prized possessions. Rebecca said this was odd because Sheena was not the type of person to give away her prized possessions. Sheena was not working and was dependent on Genoese for support. The gifts included dresses and shoes, which Sheena clearly said she was giving to Rebecca to keep. I spoke with Kelly about these, and she relates that this could not be further from the truth. Kelly has the actual emails and messages from Sheena sent to Rebecca concerning these items. But listen to the story of how Rebecca treated Kelly when she asked for these items back.
Let me tell you a story about Rebecca. So after Sheena's death, I had come across, it was either text messages or emails uh, regarding Sheena asking her for her belongings back. And that was dresses that she borrowed and shoes and things like that. Sheena is trying to get them back from her. So I had called Rebecca and I had asked her, I said, "Please, return her things." Sheena even said to you in an email that she wanted her things back. So, we're in the process of grieving. We would like her belongings all in one place. And now a couple of her friends, one of them borrowed a book from her, so they had returned that to me. And I'm just explaining to Rebecca, look, we just want her things in one place. And I said, maybe once we get through all this, I can give them back to you. But for now, Sheena wanted her things returned. And she said, "Okay, all right." She goes, "I'll return them." So for several days, Rebecca is saying that she will return Sheena's items to me. And then at one point she says, "Okay," she goes, "I'm coming to your house, but I forgot the dress. Can I still come?" "No, you need to go back and get the dress." So she never does, and she never comes. And so I keep asking her and keep asking her. And then at one point she says, "Well, I'd like something of Sheena's too." And now this dress was very important to me at the time because it was one of Sheena's favorite dresses. But Rebecca had borrowed it, obviously not returning it. And Sheena's asking for it back. So she keeps promising me that she's going to return it to me, and she doesn't. Finally, I get tired of it. I take photographs that I have of Sheena's showing her wearing this dress, just in case I was going to need them. I drove over to Rebecca's house, and when I pull in front of her apartment, all of a sudden I see Rebecca goes and closes her windows that are on her apartment on the first floor. I knock on the door, and she's refusing to answer me. I kept asking, Rebecca, would you please? I'm here. Will you please? I know you're in there. I already saw you close the window. Will you please just return Sheena's dress to me? She won't open the door, and she won't address this with me. I know she's in there, so I call the Clearwater police because that's where Rebecca lives. And I called the police. I show them the pictures. I explain everything to them. And so finally the police come. They knock on her door. She opens up the door and only allows them to go in. So after some good 15, 20 minutes later, the police come back out and they apologize to me, but they said that she's not giving you the dress because Sheena gave it to her. And I said, how does she make this up now when I've got emails showing that my daughter was asking for her things back? So this just goes to show you how cruel and evil this Rebecca is. And evil is a term that every single one of Sheena's friends felt about Rebecca. And it's interesting that Rebecca refers to me as evil when she's the one of all the people that know her describe her as evil. In addition to that, in her background, she has an arrest for theft. Sheena didn't give her anything. I can tell you that right now.
So this is the person that the FDLE claims is one of Sheena's good friends, and other than Genoese, is the only one of Sheena's friends interviewed that believes Sheena committed suicide. She then goes on to state in the FDLE report that it was clear to her that Sheena was in an ever-deepening spiral of depression. She said that Genoese still grieves about the loss. Rebecca claimed that Sheena was a heavy vodka drinker and consumed large amounts daily. She goes on to say that there is no longer a relationship between herself and Kelly Osbourne, whom Anaya said is, quote, evil. Rebecca believes Osbourne would not accept the fact that Sheena commit suicide because Kelly was not there for Sheena when she needed her. Rebecca then goes on to say Kelly and Sheena had been fighting frequently during the holidays before her death, and Sheena was not speaking with her mother. Rebecca even says that Kelly will not accept that she was the partial cause of Sheena's depression. This report from Rebecca is absurd on so many levels, and is not supported by the established facts in this case. Timelines don't match up, and holes everywhere in this story. And not to mention the fact, Rebecca is financially tied to Genoese, something the FDLE conveniently fails to address. Kelly and Dave then talk about the way Rebecca acted a few days after Sheena's death.
Kelly's house, when we were gathering in the back by the pool that one day, I believe it was before the services in Tampa, and we were discussing that Sheena was obviously going to be brought back to New York for a service there, and she was going to be buried in New York. And Rebecca was the one that came forward, and she's trying to tell me, sitting at Kelly's table, that Sheena wanted to be cremated. Get involved in this conversation with Kelly and I about planning Sheena's services, and she's insisting that Sheena told her that when she died, she wanted to be cremated. And I had looked over at Kelly and I said, who is this girl anyway? I was like, she's stand here and tell me that I'm going to cremate my daughter? I said, I've never heard anything come from Sheena's mouth about, what she wanted to have done to herself after she died. And where would Rebecca come up with, what Sheena's wishes were after she passed away? And I got this girl standing there telling me, no, she wants to be cremated. She always told me When she dies, she wants to be cremated. And I told Kelly, get her away from me. I don't even want her. She's not part of this conversation, for one thing. And I'm not going to listen to this person talk to me about cremating Sheena when I don't even know this girl. I never met her before. And she's telling me to cremate my daughter.
Shortly after Sheena's death as well, that Rebecca has her daughter's birthday had come up, and Genoese, I heard, threw a very elaborate birthday party at this fine restaurant for Rebecca and her daughter.
Next, the FDLE talks about Kelly and Dave. They devote 3 short paragraphs in a 44-page report about their interaction. The first claim made by Sheena's parents that the FDLE report talks about is from the hotel guest who told her boyfriend to call 911. We heard that interview in the previous episode, but there is nothing written about what Kelly found, just that she turned over the info. Next, the FDLE says Kelly reported that Detective Diaz's January 1st report, noting that Sheena's prior suicide attempt, mental issues, and her being diagnosed as bipolar was, quote, an utter fabrication. Here we go again. The FDLE conveniently forgetting to mention very important information here. There is no report written by Detective Diaz on January 1st. And Detective Diaz did not speak with Kelly until January 2nd. So yes, this interaction is an utter fabrication. When Detective Diaz talks to Kelly, she did tell him about calling the hospital, but after Genoese told her Sheena was suicidal all night. But nothing was ever said on January 2nd about Sheena when she was 14. The FDLE report then talks about Dave and his 2 biggest issues with Genoese. The first is a second hotel key, which the FDLE never addresses in this entire report. The second was the fact that Sheena said her purse was taken during the 911 call she made. The FDLE addresses this by saying she made it up on the call, just like all the stuff she said to the responding officers Basil and Sakiri, who we remember did not file a report until 3 days after their interaction with Sheena. The FDLE report then mentions that they interviewed the witnesses at the Claudio's New Year's Eve party, but only talk about one person, Brenda Claudio. She says in the report that she did not see Genoese at the party, only in the morning at around 9 or 10 a.m. John Ferentinos was the one who told her that he saw Genoese on the couch. You already heard Ferentinos talk about Genoese not being downstairs and telling him that he wanted to go to the casino. But I want to play for you what Ferentinos said to Sal about the relationship between Genoese and the Claudios after Sheena's death.
When did you find out that Sheena had passed away?
God, he moved out of that home and was living in a high-rise in Clearwater. I was there maybe 3-4 times at least. Nothing was said and I didn't know anything. When I found out Marcos and Brenda moved out, there was some kind of controversy between him and Brenda was kind of fearful of him and wanted to leave.
So between
Genevieve and Brenda, she kind of, from what I took of it, she was scared of him and she didn't want to be near him no more. And Marcos left working for him and found another job, and they moved out to another apartment and they've been living away from him ever since.
So they moved out of that place and away from.
Correct. Now, I got married in 2010. And right before my wedding, I was talking to Brenda, and I was down there to visit them. And when I spoke to Brenda, she told me, hey, you need to listen to this audio tape. This is serious. Joe's in a lot of trouble. Now, she didn't tell me what day it was or anything like that, so I had no idea I was even a part of this, that I was even going to be a witness. And I started listening to this audio tape, and that's when I found out Sheena passed.
What was this audio tape?
It was Kelly Osbourne talking to somebody on a radio station.
Oh, okay.
And it was actually played on the internet, and I went to the actual site and I played it because she sent me the link, and I linked up to it at the time. And I was listening to it, and I kind of freaked out. I was like, I can't believe this. You know, and at the time, knowing Joe since I was 12 years old, you'd look at it and like, wow, I couldn't imagine him actually doing this. And I was kind of shocked because I've known Joe for such a long time. It's kind of scary when you know somebody so long and now there's a question whether he could have done something or not like this. And that's the scary part, that especially since my kids have been around him and stuff like that. And I've never seen him like that. But then again, a lot of people don't show their true colors around other people.
Clearly, Brenda was scared of Genoese. But because this is another instance where the FDLE conveniently doesn't record the interview or have the witnesses fill out a statement, we really don't know what was said between the FDLE and Brenda. Which is what I want to make very clear to the listener. Because these statements aren't written or taped, we really don't know what was said during these interviews. These are instead recaps from the FDLE investigators of the interview. John Ferentinos talks about his experience during the FDLE interview process with Sal.
So one thing we kind of stalled on was the FDLE interview. You mentioned one was on the phone with you, and do you remember at all what he asked you or the investigator?
They asked me about the night, any question, and then they asked me about what I seen, and I told them everything I told you, and then when I read my statement after Kelly got a hold of me, I noticed a couple of inconsistencies. For one example was they said I went out the back door, and I don't remember seeing any cars at all. I couldn't have went out the back door and out through the back because there was no way out from the back unless you went out to the front. Because of the way the gate was set up and the fencing.
The downstairs area has no back door out.
It has a back door out, but it goes to the front. So you still be in the front.
You still got to go around to the front.
Yes, I do believe. I didn't ever go out that way, but I do believe there's a gate on the side that you go out to the front, but you'd still see his car.
Right, but you
don't
didn't
exit out the back because you'd have to jump a fence, and I'm not jumping any fences anymore.
All right, I got you. So you didn't see his car?
No.
Out there.
And they're saying that I never even mentioned the fact of his car.
Did they mention in your statement, because I see in the statement here about where your name came up in their written statement, it makes no mention of you saying that he said he was going to the casino.
The reason
Did you tell them that? Or?
No, the reason I didn't say that is there was a few times that were still in question in my head. I was sitting there and I was honestly trying to figure out which day was which, because you're talking about going from 2008 and 2009 to 2011, 2012, even possibly 2013, the beginning of 2013, trying to remember everything that happened. And I don't want to, and my mom told me, don't give any information unless you're 100% sure.
So you're sure in your mind now?
Yes, I sat there and I really thought about everything. And I knew for a fact at that point when I sat down, but the issue I had is, I'm sitting there with one of his workers, which was a friend of mine.
Oh, this is the second interview?
Yes, on the second interview. The first one, I really wasn't sure. I mentioned it, and I said, but I'm not sure. I said, I'm honestly thinking about it. I'm trying to get everything together, and I was sitting there, and the more I thought about it, and unfortunately, I got a hold of my ex-wife, and I didn't really want to get a hold of her, but she remembered me saying the same thing to her, that he went to the casino that night. And unfortunately, I don't talk to her no more, nor do I ever want to see her again. But yeah, that was right around the time when me and her were separating and being apart. I actually asked her, and I remembered that question.
She recalled the conversation, which
she recalled me talking to her. I said, "Oh, Joe's going to the casino." I said, "I should have went with him."
Okay,
because I was getting bored.
I got you.
And she goes, "Well, you're going to spend our money." I said, "I wouldn't have to spend no money with Joe."
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe was always like that. He'd give you if you weren't his wife.
Okay. So yeah, the second interview, you said you got a phone call from Anthony. And then where did you wind up meeting with him?
At Anthony Leperato's house.
At his house.
Yes.
So where did he live from here, or did?
He still lives there. He still lives. It was on Camel Lane at the time in Poinciana. That's about 8 to 9 minutes away
from here. Yeah. So FDLE was there.
Yes.
You're sitting at his house
in the kitchen.
And they questioned you.
They questioned me, and Tony was in the front area, which is not soundproof. You can hear everything I'm saying.
Was there a tape recorder present?
I don't believe there was, no.
You didn't see one?
No, I didn't see one.
And did anyone inform you that they were taping it?
Nobody informed me anything about being taped.
Okay. So that I remember. Now, we get back to this now. So at some point, you're sitting there getting questioned about that night.
Yes.
The New Year's Eve night, like we're talking about it here. Did you have an opportunity to tell them that Joe told you he was leaving to go to the casino?
No, and honestly, the reason I didn't tell him at that time is I was afraid that if I did say something, Tony is a good person. I've never thought he would ever do anything intentionally, but he, sometimes people slip, and I was honestly afraid that if he did say that I knew that he wasn't there, something could happen to me, and I was nervous.
And why would you think something would happen to you?
Honestly, because of the whole situation, I really felt in my heart that Joe did this. And because of the way I felt about it, and because of the way what happened with Brenda, and she started getting fearful,
if he could threaten her, I mean, he would. I mean, I had 2 kids. At the time, I had 1, so I'm honestly nervous for my daughter. That was my biggest concern.
He threatened Brenda.
I don't know what happened exactly. I just know she said that there was an argument and she was very scared and she wanted to get out of there as fast as possible.
Okay.
All right. And you hear that, and you hear the stories, and then when you're watching Dr. Phil, you hear that he pulls out a gun in front of her friends, and you see this. If he can do it, he's capable of doing that in front of people that he really doesn't know. What's he going to do to somebody that actually tells the truth about him?
Okay.
So I didn't want to say anything in front of them. However, Anthony Lacalata was able to give a statement without anybody present. I did speak to Anthony because he mentioned the fishing trip, and I had to explain to Anthony because no matter how much I love Anthony, Anthony has a serious problem smoking pot.
Mm.
And I think his brain is kind of conjuncted everything. His memory is shot when it comes to certain things. He was mixing 2 or 3 different times together.
The fishing trip he was relating to
The day before he was day after New Year's Day.
I got you.
And the thing that didn't make sense is, if you even watch Dr. Phil, Tony's statement made no sense. How were you fishing when you got a phone call? Like I said, he got a phone call and went to go find out what happened to Sheena.
Right.
Okay, even though he didn't tell any of us that's what it was, he took off to do that. How did he come back and go fishing with you when you never came back?
Right, so Anthony's very, very, like you say, mixed up.
Yeah, I love him to death, but he was never the brightest crayon in the box.
After interviewing a few of Sheena's friends, the FDLE makes a statement that I'll read directly from the report. Quote, Sheena was only unhappy when fighting with Genoese, and none had seen threats of violence from Genoese. End quote. Again with this statement that is not supported by hard evidence and the interviews of other witnesses. Kelly Holland has stated on multiple occasions that Genoese chased Sheena's ex-boyfriend, Sal Vaccaro, with a gun. But also, Genoese grabbed Sheena violently enough on New Year's morning to leave marks on her body. This exchange was heard by multiple hotel guests. So why is this even in the FDLE report? Next, the report talks about Daniel Grossi and the cell phone pinging report, which we've talked about in the previous episode. As we continue with the FDLE report, I want to talk about their review of the crime scene and photos. The first thing they talk about is the way Sheena was found. They mention 1 scratch on her neck. Although not a huge discrepancy, but showing their complete lack of detail, it should be noted that there were 2 marks on Sheena's neck and 1 on her finger that Sheena took pictures of. The report then states there was no evidence of the scene being wiped down or cleaned. Crime scene photos show a clear pattern of drops of water, not the streaking that is left after swiping of a towel. Additionally, crime scene reports specifically say there were no swipes or marks observed on the shower walls. Hold on a minute. This said it was observed, not tested for. So Detective Diaz never even tested for Sheena's handprints in the shower? How did she lower herself down then? The FDLE report continues and talks about sand being found on the shower floor, the threshold, and the bathroom floor. Sheena's flip-flops were just outside the shower. I have Sal talk about the problems with this report of the crime scene.
I want to go back to you're talking about tile. Tile in most cases is it's made of ceramic and it has a glossy surface. To some degree, it's glossy or semi-glossy. It retains oils to the sense where you would see the oils if you dusted for prints or if you used a crime site scope, which would allow you to enhance the oils so you could see them. They didn't put any dust on the walls, any fingerprint dust on the walls or on the floor. They didn't use a crime site scope because there's no mention of it in their report. They clearly did this with the naked eye and with pictures. And they go, there's droplets. Well, if you take a wet towel and you wipe the shower wall, it's going to it's going to form droplets to dry. That's just the nature of the beast. When you wipe it off, it's going to have droplet looks. Well, they're trying to say that basically somebody took a shower in there and it dried on the wall that way, and that's where the droplets came from. But they still don't explain why they didn't process those walls for fingerprints or swipe marks, or the floor for footwear impressions. They never explain it. They don't discuss it. They take a close-up of her feet where you can see the sand caked on her feet, but no sand all around in the shower, which makes no sense because if she walked in, she would have left sand particles all over that shower floor, but they're not there. But if she was drug in, oh my, that's why there's no sand particles on the floor. But they didn't process it. Again, they try to make a big deal out of what they say they observed, but they didn't process anything. Observation is not just with the naked eye. You got the shower floor is where she's at. You've got the floor going to the shower. There's some sand. They are on a beach. That sand could be from her or Joe going in and out of the shower during the course of the day they were there. But there's no sand, which is important, in the shower area where she's at, except for a few little granules under her feet directly, which obviously could have fell off of her feet. But it's not like she's got so much sand on her feet. I mean, she looks like a piece of breaded chicken on her feet, if you want to use that terminology. Is that it's coated? Her feet are coated with sand. That should have been all over the shower floor when she was walking in there, supposedly to hang herself. It's not there because she was drug in there. She was not walking in that shower. But see, they want to refer to it like crime scene photos. Well, I looked at those photos. I've looked at every crime scene photo that there is on Sheena's case. And the more I look at them, the more it's indicative of a homicide covered up to look like a suicide than anything else. But these experts on their side, want to keep it a suicide.
When the Archangels of Justice reviewed the crime scene photos, they noticed that the metal clasp of the dog leash was not fully closed and sitting on top of the shower pipe. I have Sal explain this further.
FDLE and Braden Beach said that whoever fastened the leash tied it. They said it was tied. In other words, whoever fastened the leash would have put it around the shower head and tied a knot. It was not tied in a knot. It was the little clasp that you push your thumb down against the spring and open it and attach it to the dog collar. What the person did was took the leash at that end and looped it around the shower head and then put the clasp, open the clasp, and slip the leash into the clasp. Follow me? And then they released the spring, and that would have closed the little thing that goes up and down in the leash, and would have fastened the leash itself, the cloth part, with inside that. But it wasn't. It was partially inside that. In other words, the little thumb clasp that you slide down, the little latch when it moves back into place, was actually halfway into the leash itself. So any significant force at all would have jerked that right out of there. And importantly, is that part was on top of the shower head. Now, imagine if you were going to hang yourself and you turn around and you're facing the thing and you don't tie it, you decide to use the clasp. Well, you're going to have the clasp down in front of your eyes where you can see what you're doing. The clasp was on top of the shower head, almost in a blind fashion, which gives me more of an indication that if somebody propped Sheena up in the shower, already dead, with the leash around her neck, they could have propped her up with their legs, basically straddled her and pushed her up against the wall, reached up and clasped that leash, and then when they thought it was solid enough, lowered her gently to the ground. Because remember, she was almost sitting. She was not hanging. And that's what people need to understand in this. This is not a hanging. People that hang themselves, and I've seen a lot of them, when they hang themselves in such a fashion that they cannot put their feet back on the ground at all. They're hanging high enough off the ground to where whenever they step off or whatever they're standing on, or kick it out from under them, a chair, a cement block, whatever it may be, they're going to drop suddenly, and their feet cannot touch the ground. Sheena's legs were all the way out in front of her. Her butt was only 6 to 8 inches off the floor. So she was not hanging, and the leash was not tied. So this is important.
To sum up what Sal is saying, the handle part of the dog leash was pulled through and wrapped around Sheena's neck. The metal clasp that attaches to the dog collar was sitting on top of the shower head, not fully closed. Which would mean if Sheena hung herself, she turned around and attached the dog leash over the shower head, which would be difficult for her to keep secure when she turned back around. But if she was able to make that turn and then did suddenly drop, it is highly unlikely the clasp would have stayed fastened to the fabric. but if she lowered herself slowly, which would be even more difficult to keep the clasp attached, she did so without touching the sides of the shower and without having her pant legs roll up to her ankles. So while that shower clasp is a small detail, it makes the explanations put forth by the FDLE and the Bradenton Beach Police difficult to prove. The FDLE report goes on to talk about the examination of Sheena's fingernail clippings, which were done by biologist Virginia Racker. When she examined Sheena's fingernail clippings, she found no evidence of blood. There were no DNA profiles found on Sheena's fingernails other than Sheena's. What the FDLE report fails to mention here is Detective Diaz was supposed to send those off for analysis in 2009, but never did, and left them in his office until the FDLE asked for them. I had Sal talk about Detective Diaz not following protocol again.
Her clippings, her fingernail clippings, were in a box or a bag in his office for 4 years. They were not put in a refrigerator. They were not kept in an enclosed environment, which would have been controlled. Those should have been sent away when he got them. He should have took them from the medical examiner and sent them directly to the lab for DNA analysis. But he didn't bother. Diaz did not want to investigate a homicide. He wanted to investigate this to be a suicide, and that's it. As I said before, and I'll say it until the day I die, if you go into a crime scene and you treat that scene like a suicide, that's all you're going to do. And people get away with murder all the time because they're smart enough to stage a murder to look like a suicide, and inept cops like Diaz fall for it every time.
Now the FDLE report goes into their investigation of the 911 calls. They first talk about the hotel guest 911 call and how they stated the fight was about money. The FDLE again fails to mention that they heard Sheena tell Genoese to get his hands off her neck. The report then moves into Sheena's 911 call. And please listen to how they talk about what is said on the call. The FDLE reports everything that was said on the call, but then talks about their reviews of the call compared to what was said to responding officers Basil and Security, who I've noted many times before did not file a report of this incident until 3 days after. But the FDLE uses their report and says this: despite Sheena's claims to responding Bradenton Beach police officers and the Hillsborough County Sheriff's dispatcher, there is no supporting evidence indicating that Sheena had called the police to report the incident at the bridge walk. It is interesting the FDLE tries to discredit this. I do not remember Sheena stating on the 911 call that she called the police, only that they had showed up. Another indication of the lack of attention to detail in this report. As the review of Sheena's 911 call continues, the FDLE talks about her alleged domestic violence and specific injuries during the incident, and the claim that she filed police reports concerning them with the Bradenton Beach Police. Bradenton Beach Police stated that Sheena had not reported the domestic violence, and that she would not definitively report the cause of the mark on her neck. Again, with the contradiction that I have noted before. The responding officers reported that Sheena said she got those marks from Genoese's watch. So this is a blatant lie that does not even match up with what the FDLE said earlier in the report. Next, the FDLE finally addresses Sheena's claim on the 911 call that Genoese took her purse. They say that this is not supported by the Bradenton Beach Police, reports from the neighbors, Genoese's statements, or scene photographs. I've already talked about how the report from responding Bradenton Beach police officers is questionable at best. The report from the neighbors, though, one could make a pretty good argument that their statements do support the purse being taken, as Sheena was upset about Genoese taking money from her. I wonder where the FDLE thinks Sheena kept her money. The last two are completely irrelevant. The photographs are from after Sheena's death, and Genoese is the main suspect. So for all we know, Genoese did tell Detective Diaz that he took the purse, but we would have no idea, as Genoese was never recorded or made to sign an official statement until 4 years later. We do know for sure that Genoese took Sheena's apartment keys. Another issue the FDLE addresses is Genoese's failed polygraph test. The FDLE polygrapher says that Jack Tramarco asked leading questions to invoke an emotional response. I thought that was the point of a polygraph test. The problem with her statement, though, is she never reviewed the questions asked by Jack Tramarco to Genoese. Her statements were from what she was told by Genoese during their interview. In the FDLE review of their polygraph test, Genoese's results indicate that it was clearly not deceptive in any of his answers. But of course, the recording and the questions asked in this test were never made public, so we were unable to review Genoese's answers. But the biggest problem is the experience level between these two polygraphists, which I have Lee Williams talk about.
Well, she said that his questions were not appropriate nor generally relevant test questions, and that they were, quote, designed to evoke emotional responses based on their very wording. Now, she never saw his written questions. The only way she found out about them was by talking to Genoese. So, and I'm telling you, from a polygraphist standpoint, you want questions that are going to evoke an emotional response. That's what you want as a polygraphist. So she's going into this polygraph of Genovese with bias. Okay, she's going in there with a bias. She should never have polygraphed Genovese because she's biased. She's believing in his innocence, and she's also got nothing for credentials. I don't get why they went to her. There are other polygraphists around, and if you look into polygraphy, there's one of the main schools is Baxter, and there's a couple other ones that kind of rise to the top where they teach polygraphy. Nobody I know, and I know a few police polygraphists, has ever heard of this certification route that she went. It's kind of a joke, and for her to question Tremarco and his credentials, that is a sick joke. Jack Tremarco, the former FBI polygraphist, he's a rock god. I mean, he ran he was chief polygraphist of FBI's Los Angeles field office from 91 to 1998. This guy has performed more than 1,100 criminal polygraphs for FBI investigations. He did the Unabomber. He did the Whitewater. He did the bombings of the World Trade Center. And the federal building in Oklahoma. This guy is a polygraphist. The gal from FDLE that said he was wrong or that he had erred has been a polygraphist for 7 years. She got her training at some community college National Guard thing up in Pennsylvania. Quite frankly, it's a joke compared to Tremarco's credentials. I don't think you'd be out of line by saying Mr. Tremarco is probably one of the premier polygraphists in the country, if not the world, based on his training and his experience.
The FDLE then hired a forensic psychologist who worked in the Bradenton Beach area, Dr. John Super, who, based on the evidence submitted by the FDLE, found 6 suicide risk factors. Most of them had to do with the now debunked suicide attempt from when Sheena was 14. Others were Genoese leaving her that night and Kelly calling about Baker acting Sheena the day she passed away. He makes no mention of the 911 call when discussing Sheena's psychological state, but does mention that her moderate use of alcohol is consistent with individuals who commit suicide. Again, this analysis was done with assumptions from incomplete reports and hearsay evidence, but the one nugget in there was their own doctor says Sheena was only a moderate drinker, not an alcoholic. Something that goes directly against what Genoese and Rebecca had stated. But of course, the FDLE's lack of detail shows up again. I have Sal talk about some of the other problems with the psychologist's report.
I mean, as you're reading this is a word-for-word report by this doctor. He never mentions how many episodes. He never mentions when these episodes occurred. He never states anything about what those particular. I know people and have worked as a police officer for years that were bipolar, they were depressed or whatever, and they never committed suicide and then be in worse situations than Sheena being left at the hotel after she had an argument with this guy, Genoese, who she has voluntarily split up with on a number of times and went out and dated somebody else and never thought a bit about it. But now all of a sudden she's going to kill herself because they had an argument that night. This guy is one of those guys, you pay him enough money, he'll write what you want him to write. He's another creative writer. He's not putting any specific dates or times. He's using generic terms. If this case had gone in front of an attorney, that would have been for the family and the victim family, they would have shredded Super's report. They would have brought in another expert and they would have held his feet to the coals and say, you show us all these episodes, where these dates were, and how did these things add up to a suicide by hanging by a female 22 years old who's not intoxicated and not on any kind of medication that's making her so depressed that she resort to taking her own life, which about 85 to 90% of the suicides I've worked, they've all had drugs or alcohol on board, significant amounts. She had none. So the risk factors he's talking about, when, from where? He's got nothing to back it up. Nothing. And you got Dr. Phil saying her 911 tape said she was controlled and not suicidal, or 2 voice analysts who listened to the tape said the same thing. You got 3 experts saying truthful, not excited, and and in control and not suicidal. This guy comes up with this nonsense. She had risk factors. What risk factors? He hasn't proved anything but wrote something that the police wanted him to write.
In the final section of the report, the FDLE addresses the public narrative and the quote, popular misconceptions. The FDLE report states that the two most notable misconceptions are 1. There was sand found on Sheena's feet, but none on the shower floor, and 2. No fingerprints were found in the shower. The sand issue is explained away by this. The scene photo clearly reveals sand and other debris, including hair on the shower floor, under and near Sheena's feet, and on the threshold leading into the shower. The FDLE is being very tricky with their language here. Sand was seen in the photographs, but not the amount that should have been in relation to the amount on Sheena's feet. Basically, if Sheena hung herself and she was barefoot, the sand on her feet would have left footprints of sand in the shower, or much more than was found. The report then tries to debunk the fact that some media outlets said there were no fingerprints in the shower, but their explanation leads to more questions than answers, because other investigative techniques should have been utilized here to prove suicide or murder. The report states that crime scene technician Jason Smith collected 6 latent cards for analysis from inside the shower. The prints found on the shower head were of value, but not of quality for entry into the National Search Database. A comparison of Genoise's prints to those that were obtained from the shower head were negative. Agents were unable to locate any prints for Sheena. First off, Jason Smith only swiped for fingerprints in the shower, but did not test for fingerprints on the dog leash clasp, which would prove if Sheena touched it last. Second, the crime scene technician didn't even check for footprints in the shower. Then the FDLE just casually mentions that they never had Sheena's fingerprints. How is that possible? I had Sal talk about the basic investigative procedures that were not followed and Florida law when it comes to collecting prints at an autopsy.
Here's where I want to laugh and stop you for a second. In an autopsy, the medical examiner takes 2 sets of fingerprints off the deceased. They keep one on file, and the other one they hand to the investigator. So where did her fingerprints go? Where did they go? I have to ask that question. I read that the first time I read that in that report, I wanted to vomit. I'm going, what do you mean there's no record of her fingerprints? That's a state requirement to take her fingerprints during the autopsy. I've done them at the scene with a dead person. Actually inked their fingers and rolled the prints myself. And then when I go to the autopsy, the doctor will give me another set. So I can use those for elimination purposes if I have to in a case that I'm working on. So with them not having one on record to make the comparison to her is a joke, number one. It shows you, again, protocol not being followed. And number 2, who did the examination saying they didn't match Genoese? Gee, if the person that made that examination is anything like the clowns that worked this case, I don't believe in that examination either. This is what you got to look at. Then when they say they're not of APHIS qualities, what he's saying is they're unable to put them in the national database to see whose fingerprints they might have been. They didn't compare them against any of the police officers on the scene during the domestic, after the domestic, the day of the, maybe one of them left a fingerprint up there, but they didn't compare any of them to eliminate that. Just like when they stepped in the shower to remove her body. All that footwear should have been established before anybody went in that shower to do anything, and before they removed her body out of there. But they didn't do that either. They just cluttered up the mess and made a bigger mess than they had. No fingerprints. They were fingerprints, or should have been, because that's what they do during the autopsy.
The next 7, quote, media claims the FDLE tries to debunk are in order. 1. Sheena had unexplained bruising on her back. Sal talks about this.
She did. They're in the pictures. They're clearly in the pictures that they took at the scene. There's bruises, but nobody explained them in the autopsy, and nobody explained them at the crime scene. But there's bruises. The crime scene investigator doesn't mention them. So they're saying that the reports that the medical examiner did and the other investigators did do not support the statements, but the photographs clearly show them. But this is, again, evidence that they chose to ignore.
The second, Sheena had a cut on the interior of her right hand. Okay, does the FDLE think the public is stupid? Sheena had a cut on the exterior of her left hand. Putting things that are written incorrectly is not debunking anything. The third, Sheena was unhappy in her relationship and had been trying to end it for months. Well, Sheena actually ended the relationship right after Christmas, but was coaxed by Genoese to go to Bradenton Beach. The fourth, the cuffs on Sheena's pant legs were tucked under her feet, indicating that she had been drugged into the shower. Well, this is actually supported by the crime scene photos, and I have Sal talk about why this is important.
Listen to me, they're lying. They have the same photographs I have, the same photographs Sheena Morris's mother has, the same photographs that were taken by Manatee County Sheriff and the medical examiner's investigator. Those photographs clearly depict her pants leg under her heels, that she had been dragged into the shower in that fashion. So they are lying because they have those photos. And it would take a complete idiot to sit there and look at those photos and go, that doesn't support that she was dragged. Because you could do this yourself. Put on a pair of really loose fitting long pants, put yourself against the wall, and shimmy yourself down the wall. You don't have to hang yourself to do this. Just shimmy yourself down the wall. I guarantee you, your pants leg will wind up riding up out on the outside of your heel up to your Achilles heel. Now, have somebody drag you with that same pair of loose fitting pants with the elastic waistband across the floor, and them pants legs are going to wind up under your heels. It's physics, there's friction. It's like I said before, she didn't levitate into that shower. If she didn't walk in it, somebody dragged her in it, and there's no evidence to prove she walked in there. None at all. More evidence leans towards her being dragged in. But they ignore all of it, or they want to say everything that they found doesn't support what everyone else is saying happened, because it's easier for them to say it.
The fifth, Sheena's waistband was riding low on one hip, indicating that she had been dragged. The FDLE says the final position of the waistband was a result of her being prepared to be transported to the medical examiner's facility. My first question about this is they didn't lift Sheena's shirt up to get a clearer picture before moving her body? I have Sal talk a little bit about the waistband.
A mark on her buttocks that indicates that the elastic band had been in her skin for a length of time that would indicate that during the time of her death, her pants were pulled down like that, and that waistband was on an angle. I forget if it was lower on the left side or the right side, but I remember in the photograph that the waistband left kind of like a ligature mark in her skin. That would not have happened just when they dragged her out of the shower and laid her on the floor for transport. That was because she had been in that position with the pants in that position the whole time she was hanging in that shower. But again, they could say what they want to say, because they're the authority. And here they're disputing media claims. Why are they disputing media claims? Because they want people that have read the paper to go, oh, everything the media said was baloney. But that's not the case. The media didn't report every inconsistency. But they've had experts in this field, a number of us, that have brought this to light, and they have ignored every one of us, every expert. They want to say we're not experts anymore because when we retired, we're no longer experts. I said, well, if I wasn't an expert when I was working, I surely can't be one now then either. So I guess everybody I put in prison, you better let them all out.
The sixth media claim the FDLE talks about is that a bracelet found on Sheena's right wrist after her death had been placed on the wrong wrist by her killer. I don't think I really need to address this because it is meaningless to the death investigation. The seventh, though, is about Genoese taking Sheena's purse before departing the bridge walk. The FDLE report then states, quote, none of these were supported by their investigation, but I think we have just proved there's some evidence for most of these, quote, misconceptions. But just because the FDLE ignores the evidence doesn't mean it's not there. The FDLE report then moves on to misconceptions of the other hotel guest, which we've covered previously, but then talks about commonly reported information about Joe Genoese. It discusses Genoese's alleged involvement with organized crime. The FDLE could not find any evidence, but John Ferentinos told Sal that Genoese often bragged of his mob ties.
Like, I had always, you always heard the stories, I know what I'm doing, I've done things, it's always been the thing. So, I always thought it's a lot of talk. Everybody that says they're from New York and they have an Italian last name, they're all part of the mob and this and that. So you always believe it's in, we'd sit down and watch, TV and we'd talk about the mob and the mob movies that were on. And that's my family. That's what my family was. And you're like, huh? Like Joe would say that? Yeah.
The report continues and finally brings up the fact that Genoese did not use a Z-Pass that night, and Genoese could not recall paying a toll. The toll booths were working, so he should have had a receipt at the very least. The FDLE just states that Genoese could not recall if he used the e-pass that morning. Here again, I don't understand how this is not at least suspicious to the FDLE. Genoese uses this e-pass every other day consistently, but the morning his fiancée turns up dead, after a physical altercation, he doesn't, and can't remember. But somehow he recalls exactly where he was when Sheena called. With everything else wrong in this quote investigation, this isn't a smoking gun in this case, because Genoese clearly went home that morning, but it shows the deceptive nature of this man. The FDLE report goes on to say, and I'm going to read directly from their words here, quote, media have made claims that Genoese physically attacked or threatened Sheena during their relationship. The investigation revealed no evidence either or to the contrary. Sheena's family and friends informed the FDLE that they'd never seen or heard any violence taking place between the two. End quote. Are you kidding me? Is this a joke? How could the FDLE actually write that in their report? What was the incident New Year's Eve morning heard by the hotel guest in both rooms? They reported Sheena told Genoese to take his hands off her neck, and she had the marks to prove it. How does the FDLE not consider that being physical? Not to mention, Genoese chased Sheena's ex with a gun. Does that sound like an emotionally stable man? The last part of the misinformation the FDLE talks about is the Bradenton Beach investigation. These first four I'm going to address quickly, as we've covered most of them before. Myth 1. The responding officers Basil and Security passed Genoese as they were walking up the stairs. How is this reported incorrectly? Basil and Security and Genoese all say as much in their statements. The second was Genoese was not interviewed by the Bradenton Beach Police for 22 days after Sheena's death. Well, this is partially correct, as he was never officially interviewed by Detective Diaz, only talked to a few times. So good job, FDLE. The third was Dave Morris was never interviewed by the Bradenton Beach Police. Well, he was never interviewed, only talked to when he picked up Sheena's belongings from Bradenton Beach Police on the 5th, which we covered before means that the investigation is pretty much closed. The fourth is that Detective Diaz fabricated the information reported concerning Sheena's medical history during the interview of Kelly on the 1st. So now it's an interview he conducted. No, that was a phone call, and it was done on the 2nd. So Detective Diaz did fabricate this because he never talked to Kelly on the 1st. The FDLE finishes their recap of the Bradenton Beach investigation by talking about Genoese and Rebecca Anaya stating that Sheena was extremely depressed and that they'd openly discussed her depression in the days prior to her death. They both also state that Sheena and her mother were not on speaking terms because Kelly kept meddling in their relationship. As I talked about before, Rebecca had only known Sheena for a year and a half, according to her. Sheena's father, who spoke with Sheena every day, had never heard her name before Sheena died. And she had Genoese paying for her attorney fees during the custody battle for her kids. Genoese, on the other hand, cannot be trusted because he's the main suspect. So if none of this is supported by the hard evidence, like a suicide note, text, or phone messages of Sheena talking about her depression, then why is this in the FDLE report? That is the conclusion of the FDLE report, and I would like to recap how they see the events of that morning. So according to them, a 22-year-old Sheena Morris and a 45-year-old Joe Genoese, who have broken up several times during the past 2 years without Sheena ever having a problem, decide to go to Bradenton Beach to celebrate the new year. After the fireworks, Genoese and Sheena fight in their room about money, her going out, or his kids. Sheena and the other hotel guests say it was about money, and only Genoese says it was about his kids or going out. The argument gets worse, and hotel guests call 911 after they hear Sheena say something about Genoese putting his hands on her. He leaves and sees 2 officers coming up the stairs. The 2 officers talk to Sheena and make no mention of Sheena seeming depressed. They change the call from domestic to disturbance, then leave. Next, Sheena makes her own 911 call, where she sounds calm and lucid and is concerned about her apartment. Genoese speaks and texts with Sheena, and there is nothing in those texts indicating depression or that she's about to commit suicide. But suddenly, shortly after speaking with Genoese, she decides to kill herself. Her feet are caked in sand, but she leaves no sand marks as she walks into the shower. She wraps a dog leash around her neck, half closes the clasp of the leash on top of the shower head, and lowers herself down without having the clasp come undone. She avoids touching the side of the shower during her slide down or when she started to choke, all while leaving her pant legs neatly tucked under her feet. Oh yeah, she supposedly tried to commit suicide in the past by non-violent means, which I covered earlier from the American Association of Suicidology, They stated that when a person tries to commit suicide by nonviolent means, they are highly unlikely to switch to a violent means. We have talked about before that Sheena did not really attempt suicide when she was 14, but either way, it actually makes the FDLE's case look even worse. With all these unanswered questions and a very unlikely suicide, the FDLE closed the case and have not looked at it since. I am sure that after you finish this episode, it can be a little overwhelming and shocking to hear that an agency tasked with protecting the people of Florida can actually go to these lengths to cover up gross police misconduct and allow a murderer to walk the streets. But this happens every day in this country, and unless there's a light shined on people like this, it is going to continue forever. Only together can we stop this injustice. I did not know how to close this episode, so I asked Kelly how she felt after reading the FDLE report.
It feels like a bad nightmare, but unfortunately, it's been our real life.
A special thanks to Mike Mack, who did all the music for this podcast. If you'd like to hear more samples of Mike Mack's work, you can go to his website, www.mike-mack.com, or you can follow him on Twitter @MikeMack. Thank you to our sponsors, Blueberry and TotalFrontPage.com. Please support them as they have supported this podcast from the very beginning. If you're interested in learning more about this case, you will soon find all the evidence and documentation used in this podcast at archangelsofjustice.org/podcast. For updates about future episodes and cases, follow us on Twitter @ArchangelPod and on Facebook under Archangels of Justice. If you would like to send us an email, you can reach us at podcast@archangelsofjustice.org. If you are listening on iTunes or SoundCloud, we would appreciate it if you left us a positive review. Thank you for listening, and I hope you will join us next week for episode 7 of the Sheena Morris case, as we review all the federal and civil laws broken by the FDLE and Bradenton Beach Police. We will also be joined by different people in Sheena's life talking about her and the way the FDLE represented their statements. Thank you again for following the Archangels of Justice case files.